All right, so today we're diving deep into something that really gets to the heart of the 1990s financial crisis in Jamaica, right?
Yeah.
We've got this witness statement, and it's intense. It's about this Jamaican businessman who takes out a loan, and, well, FINSAC enters the picture. Let's unpack this.
Yeah, it's really something how a personal story, just one person's experience, can make something like a huge historical event feel so real.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just about, economic indicators and all that. This is about real consequences for this guy. We're talking about his business, his livelihood, his home, everything, really.
Exactly. And from the very beginning of his statement, you get this feeling that he's ambitious, driven. Like it's 1995. He's been running his own handicrafts business, totally self-financed for over a decade. And then he decides, okay, it's time, and takes out this loan for 500,000 Jamaican dollars from Jamaica Citizens Bank.
Wow.
That's huge. And you can just, I don't know, you can almost feel the hope in his words,
It makes sense, though, if you think about it. Jamaica, in the mid-90s, there was this big push for economic liberalization. Everyone's talking about it. And for businesses, expanding just seemed like, well, the next logical step, right?
Right.
Taking out a loan for growth. That was pretty common, a pretty standard move at the time.
Totally. And he's very specific in his statement about what he needs the money for. He lays it all out.
Yeah.
A Ford pickup truck for the business, which makes sense. More operating capital, of course. And then he wants to build a new workshop on his property. All very practical, sensible investments for a business owner looking to grow, right?
But
But,
there's always a but.
always a but. This is a big one. He puts up his home as collateral for the loan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's pretty standard, putting up collateral. I mean, it's how loans often work, but as we're going to see, it becomes a really significant detail later on. It's almost like, foreshadowing, right? You can just feel the tension building.
Definitely. So for the first 2 years, though, things go pretty smoothly. He's making his loan payments on time, no problem.
Good.
He even includes all the receipts in his statement, which I thought was interesting. It's like this detail that shows how important it was to him, to hold up his end of the bargain. Like, look, I'm doing this right.
Yeah, it suggests that his business is doing well, too. He's actually meeting the terms of the loan. Everything's moving in the right direction.
Right. But then, around 1997, things change.
1997.
Yeah. Things get really difficult for him and for Jamaica as a whole. He starts to have trouble keeping up with his loan payments. And it's not just him, right? This is when the whole Jamaican economy takes a downturn. Businesses everywhere are struggling.
This wasn't just a little dip, though. This was a full-blown crisis. High interest rates, the deregulation in the financial sector, and on top of all that, global prices for Jamaica's bauxite and alumina exports plummet. It was a perfect storm.
And our businessman, he's stuck right in the middle of it, watching everything he's worked for start to slip away. Suddenly, that loan agreement doesn't look like a path of prosperity anymore. It's like a weight dragging him down.
Yeah.
And that's when FINSAC comes in.
Ah, yes, FINSAC, the Financial Sector Adjustment Company.
Right.
Created by the Jamaican government in 1997 specifically to deal with this crisis.
And this is where the story gets even more complicated.
FINSAC is a huge part of this businessman's story, whether for good or for bad, we'll see. Basically what happened was FINSAC, they started taking over banks that were failing, and that included, importantly for us, Jamaica Citizens Bank.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in 1998.
So FINSAC becomes his lender.
Exactly. They inherit his loan and all the terms that came with it.
And this is where it really starts to get interesting.
It's one thing to talk about the financial side, the numbers, but it's another to think about the human impact, right? A lot of debtors at this time, they really struggled to negotiate with FINSAC. They felt lost in the system. And our businessman, he's about to experience that firsthand.
So we were talking about that collateral, right? His home. With his business going under and FINSAC now in charge of his loan, things go from bad to worse.
Yeah.
He tries to negotiate, though. He offers to settle the whole debt right then and there for 50% of what he owes. I mean, it seems like a pretty reasonable attempt to get back on his feet, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, it definitely shows he's taking responsibility. But this is where things get tricky. You've got to remember the power dynamics at play here.
Right.
FINSAC, they're this huge entity with a ton of resources. Their whole purpose is stabilizing the financial sector, and they don't exactly operate like your typical bank.
And his offer. Rejected.
Yeah.
Just like that.
No.
And it gets worse. He talks about how there was just no communication from FINSAC, like radio silence. And then he opens the newspaper one day, and there it is, his house, his collateral, advertised for sale.
Oh,
Can you imagine?
That's rough. And unfortunately, that lack of communication, it was a common complaint from a lot of debtors during this whole FinSAC era.
Really?
It created so much anxiety, so much uncertainty for people. It was like this whole other layer of stress on top of everything else they were dealing with.
It's just heartbreaking. And I think it's so important to remember, this isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. This is about a man facing the possibility of losing his home.
Mm.
And then, just when it seems like things can't get any worse, he gets a temporary reprieve. His brothers, and this is amazing, they step in and make a substantial payment to FinSAC, enough to stop the sale of the house.
Wow, that's incredible. It really speaks to the power of family, especially in times of crisis.
Totally. But of course, that lump sum payment, it doesn't wipe out the debt. He knows he still needs to find a way out of this. And in 2002, he reaches out to the Jamaica Redevelopment Foundation, JRF, the agency that FinSAC appointed to handle all the debt servicing. They work out a plan. An initial payment of 500,000 Jamaican dollars, then another payment for 1 million. He actually manages to make 2 payments, determined to stick to the agreement. But then his business, which was already struggling, it fails again.
It's tragic because you see this kind of cycle over and over again in the FinSAC archives. A little glimmer of hope, a chance to get things back on track. And then, just like that, another setback. I mean, the reality was that for so many businesses in Jamaica at that time, the economic situation was just incredibly tough. Even with restructured debt and payment plans, it was an uphill battle.
So now our businessman, he's still dealing with this huge debt. And years later, the government announces a window of opportunity for FinSAC debtors. Basically, this chance to renegotiate terms, maybe get some relief.
Okay.
But for him, it doesn't pan out. He's denied favorable consideration.
It's unclear exactly why he wasn't eligible, but it does point to a larger problem. These government programs, even when they're designed with good intentions, they don't always reach everyone who needs them. Sometimes the impact isn't felt equally.
Yeah. And by 2010, his debt, which started at 500,000 Jamaican dollars, it's now ballooned to over 2.5 million.
Oh.
With a daily interest accrual of $435.30. He's staring into a financial abyss. And his statement, you could just feel the desperation. In his words, it ends with a plea for help. Like this is his last hurt.
It's a powerful reminder, behind all the economic jargon, the big picture stuff, there are real people whose lives are being turned upside down. His story really forces us to remember that.
It's hard to hear stories like this and not be moved, This businessman's story, it really highlights the fact that behind the statistics, the economic reports, there are real people whose lives are completely upended. He went from hopeful entrepreneur to, well, facing complete financial ruin, all in the span of a few years.
It makes you question a lot of things, right? Like, was it enough what FinSAC did? I mean, yeah, maybe they stabilized the financial sector, but at what cost? Did they do enough to help people like this businessman to prevent this kind of devastation? I don't know.
It's tough because you look at what he did. He really tried everything. He tried negotiating with the bank. He reached out to his family for help. He worked with JRF to restructure the debt. He even held on to hope with that government window of opportunity. And every time, it was like hitting a wall.
Yeah.
And you can feel that in his statement, that sense of helplessness, almost like resignation. And it's heartbreaking.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a human crisis.
Exactly. And I think sometimes we forget that. We get so caught up in the numbers, the big picture, that we lose sight of the human cost. What happened to this businessman, it forces us to remember that. It's a powerful reminder that economic crises don't just impact the economy, they impact people with families, dreams, and a right to a fair shot.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not just him, His story's unique, of course, but it reflects a much larger experience. So many Jamaicans went through something similar during this period. If you look at the FinSAC archives, you see these stories everywhere. Stories of hardship, of resilience, and unfortunately, very often, stories of struggles that are never truly resolved.
It makes you wonder, what could have been done differently? What lessons can we learn from this, from their experiences?
That's the big question, isn't it? And for me, that's what makes this kind of deep dive so important. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it. We can listen to these stories, understand what went wrong, and maybe, just maybe, prevent it from happening again.
This deep dive, it's been heavy at times, but incredibly important, I think. So to everyone listening, I want to thank you for joining us, for taking the time to really engage with this part of history. It's not always easy to hear, but it's important. And if this has sparked your curiosity, if you want to learn more, I encourage you to delve into the FinSAC archives yourselves. There are so many stories waiting to be uncovered, so much we can learn.
Absolutely.
And on that note, this has been a powerful and honestly pretty emotional journey. And I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's a story and a conversation that will stay with me for a long time.